We're going to chat over the next 15, 20 minutes about building marketplaces in a COVID world. We have conducted a survey of around 270 different marketplaces, primarily online real estate, about what's happening to their businesses and what they've been doing to improve their performance, deliver growth to their customers. 271 people, a whole range of respondents we've had from around the world and different levels, but primarily C-level management. So we're getting right to the people who are making the decisions. Now the first question we sort of asked them was, well, are you really still operating under sort of restrictions due to COVID? And 85% are. In fact, as many of us here in Europe will know quite well, lockdown has started to flow through again. France, where I am at the moment, Monaco. So just in the south of France there, there's restrictions. The UK hits restrictions as of tomorrow. Belgium, Italy's ramped them up and so on. So we continue to operate under these tight restrictions, and that's not really going to change in the near future. So we then broke down the survey and said, let's sort of dive into what impact it's actually having on these businesses. So let's start with financial results. We said, look, and we wanted to understand the results for September versus January, February, because we ran this survey in September and in January and October. 46% they're going to be worse off than they were at the beginning of the year. They're trying to get back to those pre-COVID levels. We then broke that down a bit further and said, well, how's that occurring in emerging markets versus established markets? Established markets, think of Western Europe, US, Australia. Emerging markets, think of Asia, Latin America, and so on. Pretty much the same. 52% were worse off in the emerging markets, which is not really that surprising given much tougher environment to make money in the first place. And then 43% were worse off in the established markets. And that's in revenues being generated as in September versus February and January in the year. We then said, well, what's that mean for costs? For most people, and this is a distribution curve of respondents, most people have reduced costs in this sort of 15 to 20% range over that time. So their cost bases are much lower, which is good. They're operating efficiently as they can. In fact, I've had many conversations with portals and other businesses who've worked out that they can actually run quite efficiently on a low cost base. They just hadn't needed to in the past, and this has sort of pushed them in that direction. And when we look at where the costs are being reduced, it's across the board. Basically half the respondents, 40 to 50% of the respondents had reduced costs across employment, marketing, office costs, and other operational. What was interesting, we looked at employment costs, because that's usually the biggest chunk of costs within any of these marketplaces, is that they've reduced the amount they're paying people using furlough type opportunities, taking pay cuts for people to keep jobs. And they've had an overall reduction in headcount by around 5 to 10%. We then said, well, how are you going, versus your budget, where you expect to end up? And reality is, yes, you've got a drop off in revenues. You're struggling to get back to them over the course of the year. No matter how much you cut your costs, you're still going to underperform your budget. And as we can see here in emerging markets, 72% of respondents said that they will underperform their budget, and 62% said that they will, in established markets, said they'll underperform as well. So clearly, it's almost a lost year in the growth of many of these businesses. What's interesting though is when we say, now let's compare your revenues for 2020 versus 2019, 40% are actually going to go backwards in emerging markets and 46% are going backwards in the established markets. So not only are they missing their budgets for 2020, they're actually doing worse than they were expecting to do compared to 2019. We then said, well, let's look at the impact of the underlying drivers on the business. So, of course, you've got to start with the customer, because if the customer is having any impact or negative problems with their business, they're not going to be able to pay your bill, and it's going to be very hard to have a good and productive relationship with them, which is profitable for both sides. So 83% of the customers of the marketplaces out there are experiencing some form of financial difficulty. Now, what's interesting is, although the customers are experiencing financial difficulty, portals and marketplaces have been able to maintain those numbers of customers. And they've maintained the number of customers through a number of mechanisms, which we'll look at in a minute. But what's interesting around this is that primarily everyone fits in this band. Some have grown their customer base, but in general, they are sitting there with a loss of customers. And at the end of the day, it works out to people pretty much kept the customer base pretty stable in that process. The process undertaken to do that has been a lot of financial incentives. Yeah, reduction in revenues, keeping the customers. Clearly, your average revenue per customer has to drop in this process. So the financial retention tools are the ones that about half the customers have used. And they've used things like free listing subscriptions, free ad products, discounted subscriptions. So it's very much around that core reason to advertise with a portal. And then they've been giving away some other bits and pieces on top of that. But it's basically, what incentives can I give the customer base so that I can maintain them as a customer, in the hope that once we are through, or at least more of a normalized approach to working in a COVID environment, we can then start to move our income and our revenues back up again. Now, half the marketplaces have also used this time of COVID to launch new products, and the range of products they've launched have really been around, automatically generating videos, 3D tours, remote viewing solutions. So there's a chunk there around, how do I better present property in particular, or products overall, so that the customers can interact with them better and can make more informed decisions online. There's been more use of social media to distribution, because they're really trying to reduce the costs. Mortgage marketplaces have been created because clearly if one side of the equation, which is the advertisers having problems, on the other side, the buyers are also probably struggling a little bit. So access to mortgages, how do I create a marketplace so that I can help make the transaction occur? Commission sharing, so that they've got in there and they've said, okay, how can I engage in my audience so that they don't have to pay to advertise, but they'll share on any value that I create them. Virtual property fairs, especially in the new development segment of the market, online education events, and rental lead management. So they've been really thinking about, how do I handle the rental leads better, as more and more people are potentially moving from owning their own homes to renting homes due to changes in financial situations that they may have. The other thing that's interesting is what has happened in terms of visitation. And for most portals out there, the number of visits has increased around 50 to 20% year on year, September to September, which shows that there is demand out there, or at least people engaging with the site. And if you then also see an equivalent number of increase in leads being generated as well. Then we said, well, what, you guys are leaders of businesses. What's your expectation over the next 6, 12, 24 months. What do you think is going to occur? Because that will help, set the tone. And what's interesting is when asked the question, how long do you expect this length of negative impact of COVID to continue? The answer is it's a bit pessimistic. We first conducted a survey back in March when sort of the first impact of COVID came. And everyone said, yeah, it'd be done by August, done by the end of the summer holidays, basically. That's clearly not occurred. The survey too we had was pushed out a little bit longer, and we held that survey also in late in March. So one was more the beginning of March, one was the later in March. So I think then people were starting to get an idea of what COVID was all about. In April, we ran a survey again, and that's then so now people are starting to know this is truly going to impact the business. We waited a few months, and then the survey conducted in both September and October. It's been pushed out to it's April next year to mid next year. We'll continue to have impact from COVID on their business. And ask the question: has COVID permanently changed the business? Over a third said yes. Their business is now in a very different business than it was in January. Tighter financial controls, changes in user behavior, a change in the in how users search, the information being presented, more of a focus on rentals, more remote working, clearly, as we all know, a lot less travel. And I think we've all experienced the fact that we're just getting used to being in one place for a long period of time. And the need to be far more agile in everything that we do. Remote working, which is one of the most important ones. What's interesting, we asked them, what impact does this have on your productivity? 33% said it's got a improvement in productivity. 48% said there's no change. And then the rest said, no, it's about reduced productivity. So overall, working from home is good. Most people believe that over the next 6 months, 6, 12, and then even permanently, will be working from home, will be a permanent part of their business. And even 20% are saying they don't need an office anymore. And they're actively considering removing the office altogether and saving on that cost. When asked about, well, do you think your business is at risk from this whole coronavirus and the continued impact of it? 30% say yes at some point. 22% short term, it's just been going for so long that it really is at risk, and some for a bit longer. And what's behind that is 12% said they haven't got cash reserves, and another 34% said they've got marginal cash reserves. So, that's putting a lot of pressure. So we then say, well, how have you gone in sort of your capital raising? And for those who have tried to raise capital over the last 6 months, 84% have been successful, 16% unsuccessful. But in that 84%, most found it quite challenging in raising capital. So it's not hard. Most C-level leaders expect 2021 to be much better. And why wouldn't they? I think for a number of reasons, it's now not a shock. It's now something that we know we're dealing with, this coronavirus. Our customers are all also knowing how to deal with it. And we've recalibrated expectations. So of course we expect it to be a lot better than it was, than this year is going to turn out. And that's starting to be reflected in what people are doing. 75% are actually hiring more staff, and 60 to 68% are actually saying, yes, I'm increasing my marketing spend. Interesting, when you double click on that, most of it's on performance-based marketing, CPC purchase, etc. from Google. So what does this all mean? Where do I sort of take this sort of high level, quick view of some of the stats that are coming out in the market and boil it down into something that the sort of the observations that I have, and then we're going to dive into a panel session with Mark and Georg. Living with COVID is going to be a new way of life, and I don't think there's going to be much of a post-COVID world. As much as governments want to try to eradicate COVID, I think we're pretty much going to get used to living with it. and living with the impact it has on us. Locking down countries, for example, Australia, you can't go in, you can't go out. They're trying to eradicate it. I think is a short-term solution because it's going to take 1 or 2 people to enter the country and it's going to take off again. And then what do governments do? Things are going to happen much faster than we imagine. So there's likely, there is unlikely to be a post-COVID world. People adapt to new situations very quickly and far better than we ever expected. And then everyone has to be far more agile and decisive to win this game. And those that are, I think, are doing very well. We've got to help the customers to create significant value. And so if we help our customers adapt, then we all create value in this process. And we've got to lean into the problem and embrace it. I think when we lean into it and embrace it, we can create a lot of value. And we have to rethink the old ways of doing business. Be prepared to make a lot of changes in this process. And as someone said to me the other day, it's now time to expect the unexpected. So